and talk about some frequently asked questions and advanced topics, for lack of a better word. I've already talked about some of these, so I'll kind of go through this rather quickly. Get rid of that. I already talked to you about how to account for fare box revenue. The old form, there was actually a line for it, and then you would subtract it out and have the number down here. Well, in OPTIS, you just have to know to subtract it out before you put it in your total expenses. So that's pretty straightforward. If you...
Are these all in our manual?
No, I'll actually email this file to you because I
Okay.
didn't want to print it out.
Okay.
There are some advanced topics in the binder, but it's not as inclusive as this, and I haven't had a chance to redo the binder recently. So we've had questions about how do I request a reimbursement that I missed on a previous request. So in the past, we would have told you to do this, to just put the current information here. So and this is kind of outdated, but you know, your quarter two, TO, whatever it is, and all your information, and then put the previous quarter under billing and how much that you forgot to ask for, basically. And the expense date, we would have asked to, you know, put the accurate true expense date, which is the last day of quarter one. Well, in OPTIS, it's sort of similar. We would ask you to do the same thing with the exception of the dates. You can't have dates from two different quarters when you're recording the expense. So you would go ahead and put, I guess I flip-flop this for some reason. It doesn't have to be. But you'd put the quarter two, which is the current period, and then you'd put quarter one, amount not billed previously or something like that. And usually when that happens, you've had a conversation with the program manager and they've said, oh, we'll make up for it on the next one, kind of thing. So then your reimbursement request would just look like this. Pretty basic, and it would just have the amounts and everything. Sometimes we actually overpay you so that you have, for some reason, reported expenses that were inflated. And then you find out later that wasn't accurate and we need to fix it. Again, you would have a conversation with your program manager about this, but you would begin the reimbursement request like you normally would. Choose the quarter for the current request, even though the overpayment was in the previous quarter. Then explain in the comments section. Can you see that okay? Seems small. This reimbursement request reflects an adjustment due to an overpayment of whatever it was for, we miscalculated our legal fees or something like that. That's pretty straightforward. The tricky part is when you go to record the expense, you have to reduce the total expenses for the current quarter by the previous overpayment total expenses. So for example, this quarter you have $10,000 in expenses and you'd normally be seeking $8,000, let's say. But you're trying to make up for this previous overpayment of $1,088. So you have to do some algebra and you have to calculate the total expenses for that overpayment amount first. So you take the overpayment amount and you divide it by 80%, which happens to be the match rate on this grant. And you get this 1,360. So that's the total expenses that would need to be recorded for a payment amount of this much.
So it's the total reimbursable expenses, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so now you've got this number, this 1,360. You would subtract that from your total expenses this month, and you get 8,640, which is the total expenses that you would put in this total expenses field. So then your payment after your match is deducted is 6,912 instead of 8,000, which calculates out to be exactly that $1,088 less than your expenses. So if that happens, that's the kind of math and calculations you have to do in OPTIS to make it all work right. So then it would just look like this. And you have your comment up here, so it's clear what happened.
Will there be some point in time where they'll have those fields where you can plug the numbers in and it'll auto-calculate, or will it always be kind of?
Probably not. Yeah. How do we know which activity line to choose when creating a reimbursement request? So this happens when your grant is funded out of multiple expense accounts or buckets of money. When you get to this select activity screen on the reimbursement request, there's no way to know what the balance is in each of these lines. And you're kind of blindly clicking them. And then you could get further along in your reimbursement request and they'd say, oh, you know, you'll have all these errors because there's not enough money there. So in order to check to see how much is left in each of those, I don't know if it's funds or activities, you have to go back to your subgrant agreement. So this is subgrant agreement. Go to payment history. And I showed you this, but the ones I showed you didn't have very much in them. This is one that has a lot of detail in it. And then you would click, you know, there's a little plus sign on each of these to expand the detail.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that here's the 1141, 1142, and 1143. And here's the amount that was funded in each of those. Here are the total payments for each of those, and here's the balance. So only this third one down here has any money left in it. So, you know, kind of write that down, record it, so that when you go back to your select activity screen, you would know to click this one right here. Check that, because these two no longer have funds in them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We wish that it would have a running balance here, and that right on this screen, and it's probably on the log somewhere, but where it would say, you know, 0 balance or something like that. But you have to go back and kind of do some research in order to know which one to check. We went over this quite a bit. This is just another section on how to attach any kind of backup documentation that you need. So you just enter the title, click browse, go find it, and then it's there. And I talked about this. If you've made a mistake on an APR, and this goes for reimbursement requests too, and you've already submitted it, call or email Francine, or you can email the reporting inbox and have us reopen it. It is important to do that quickly as soon as you know, because the payment could be in process, and then it might be hard to yank it back. So, and I talked about this too. So once, you'll notice this is from the overview screen. Once a reimbursement request is completed, it automatically generates the corresponding payment request. And if we have to, if you want your payment request or reimbursement request to be deleted, we first have to go in and delete the payment request and then reopen it and forward it back to you. So that's what this is all about. And then if you wanted to delete it after we gave it back to you, say it's just too messed up and you just want to start fresh, as long as it's in your queue and it's not complete, then you can go to Actions, Delete, and then hit Submit Return, and it'll disappear. And sometimes you do have to refresh the screen to see the action you just took take place. In the past, if you submitted a reimbursement request and there were ineligible charges on it, expenses or whatever, the program manager would probably call you and you discuss it, and she'd say, okay, we agree that this is not eligible. And she would just write on the document, I talked to so-and-so, we're not going to accept this amount, and she would just continue to process it. Well, in OPTIS, if that happens, again, we want you to make the correction. We don't want to just initial it or something. So we would return it to you. And the reason is, this paragraph here is just explaining that how OPTIS tracks everything. I told you it tracks the match. Well, it also tracks all your expenses, whether we paid you for the expenses that you reported or not. It's tracking those expenses. So if we don't revert it back to you and have you correct it and reduce your expenses, then eventually you're going to get to the point where you've used up all your expenses and it won't allow you to continue. So that's what, I'm not going to read that paragraph, but that's what it's talking about. So just let us reopen it and then you can fix it. I've already talked about printing for both reimbursement requests and quarterly reports, agency periodic reports. You do the view PDF and let it load and then print it. You'll get a much nicer picture. Sometimes, or you can also save it like Jay was talking about. Sometimes you want to print something that doesn't have that view PDF option. So most of you may already know this, but you can do a print screen from your keyboard. It's only going to print, like if you have it expanded or whatever, it's only going to print what you see on the screen. But you can do Alt Print Screen, And then what I usually do is just open up a blank Word document and then just click paste, and it's taken a picture and pasted it. Sometimes you want to manipulate the screen view and your printer settings to get everything to fit. So if you wanted to print this payment history, which is something a lot of people would like to print, but it's really long and you can't get it all, right click on the screen and select print preview, and then click on landscape, which will make it spread out longer. You can reduce the zoom percentage until you see everything, and then you could print that. You can also, if you happen to have software, which I do, I'm really lucky, when I did all these screenshots, I have this thing called Snagit where you can just take pictures, and it's really great, but a lot of people don't have that. So that's just kind of how to do that. Any questions? I don't want to just keep rambling. Okay.
You can capture a screenshot with any computer using the print screen button.
Do you have to do control print screen?
Just regular print, just press print screen, and you can paste it in the page.
Huh.
I guess it's sort of the same.
Sort of the same, but yeah, okay, thank you. I think I talked about this. When you're doing the grant information screen in the agency periodic report, it's where each individual grant shows up with the section where you can type in, why do my closed grants still appear? It's just because they are still part of the history of what's happened with you in that biennium. When you go to the next biennium, the closed grants would not show up again and show up again. I have been asked if external users can save their login screen so they don't have to do the user ID and password each time. And I didn't think so, so I asked Ivan, and he said that this is his words. This cannot be remedied since OPTIS requires a new login session ID each time the system is accessed. And that's just to keep it secure. People would like the budget detail worksheet to be included in OPTIS, and we all agree that would be a great thing. And at that step 8, grant information is probably the place that it'll end up. Eventually we'll do that. But until then, you have to just attach it. I think somebody back here got the bad referrer message earlier. And again, I had to talk to Ivan about this. So he's talking about system cookies. In a secure system, cookies are what keep the application in communication with the server. And just sometimes, for some reason, that connection is lost, and you'll get this bad referrer message. If you don't use the internal to OPTIS back and forward and close buttons, sometimes that can cause that. I've also noticed that if I'm working in OPTIS, and I do have 2 screens at my desk, if I'm working in OPTIS and then I go out of OPTIS to look something up on the internet or put something in a Word document or something, sometimes it'll do kind of funny things. I don't know. But if that happens, you just have to, sometimes you have to log in again or refresh and it'll come back. So this is one of the really, really good things about OPTIS, is that if you have a question about a payment, you don't have to call us. You can go look for it. And so this explains, you go to My Documents, Document Search, find by organization, find your subgrant agreement, open the View Data, and then Payment History. And then you get this screen, which we've talked about. You click on the little plus sign to expand it. And then you have all this information in here. And whoa. I was trying to make it a little bit bigger, but it doesn't want to. So I talked about this early yesterday, that the first 3 columns really is just internal information. And then here's the invoice date for a payment, the OPTIS batch number, the Teams batch number, the check date, how much was requested, and the payment. So all of these have gone through the entire process, and you know that because you see check number and check date, so you know that they've gone out. But if you logged in here and say the bottom one here had an OPTIS batch number, but it didn't have the Teams batch number or the check number and the check date, you'd know that it's in OPTIS, we've got it, we've batched it with a group of payments, and it's probably on its way to Teams, which is ODOT's financial system, to be processed. And sometimes you'll see the Teams batch, but no check number, and that means it's in Teams. They're waiting to process it. You'll probably be getting the check soon. So you can kind of tell what's happening with payments by going to that. And then you can also click on this to see more detail. It'll open up the actual reimbursement request for that item. And that's just opening it up to see more detail. You can also go to the overview screen, and you'll see this, and it has all these payments reimbursement requests and payment requests. And you can see here, there are a lot more on this column than this because 4 of these are not complete, so the corresponding payment request hasn't been generated yet. And these would obviously be 4 things that you might want to look at because they're not done yet and they're still in basically your responsibility. And I talked about that a lot, so I'm going to skip over that. There's also a report that we can run called Vendor Payments for the Biennium, and we run this out of Teams. Sorry for the jumpiness here. There was a situation where, and Janet Wright told me I could use this. She got a check from ODOT for this amount down here, $127,102. Yeah, and that total number didn't match up to any of her invoices, and she couldn't figure out what this check was for specifically. We're limited to like 21 characters, I think, on the remitted vice on the check, and so sometimes we can't put enough information for it to be helpful on your end. So I did some research and was able to run this report for her, and what it told me was 2 of the payments, the bottom one and the middle one, were for grant agreements, and there's the grant agreement number and what quarter it was and everything. And then this $29.80 was an RTAP reimbursement for training. She actually came to OPTIS training, and this must have been her mileage or something that we paid her. But Teams, ODOT's accounting system, they take all requests for payment that come in within 3 or 4 days, and if they're all going to the same provider, same agency, they'll just lump them all together to save paper and everything. Mm-hmm. So that's what they did here. And this is just another view of that same inquiry where it shows it was RTAP, OPTIS training reimbursement for Janet and that type of thing. So if you ever get something that you don't understand, we can run that report for you. And here are some external user suggestions. Could you please allow for an agency's entire vehicle fleet to be maintained in OPTIS, not just PTD-funded ones? And that is definitely something we're working on. We recognize that's a great idea, but we're still trying to figure out how to allow you to use your own numbers that might be the exact number some other agency is using and not get that confused in the system. So add a tag number for locally assigned vehicle numbers to the OPTIS asset register so you can keep track of that. We're working on it. It's feasible, and we just have to not only figure out how to do it, but then pay to have the software developer do it. Can't copy and paste in bulk. Like if you have your spreadsheet with all your mileage, you can't copy it like one whole column and then paste it into OPTIS. You have to go one by one, and apparently that's not something that really can ever be fixed. Add a link to the asset register from 9 assets, so when an error message appears, when you get that odometer reading is less than last reported, you could go right back to your assets. It would take you back to that particular vehicle, and you could see what's going on. That's been logged as a feature request, as has having a list of all VINs in the drop-down menu at accident reporting, so you wouldn't have to key it in. Since OPTIS already keeps track of all your vehicles, it'd be nice if you could just have that there, and when you have an accident, you could just choose the right one instead of having to key it in. And that also has been logged. And then this is upcoming improvements. Yes?
If someone needs that quick of access to their accident reporting, then they have a problem, I think.
That's true.
If an agency was like, I need something really easy to log in all my accidents, maybe there's a problem there. That's
true. It's very true. It just goes to show you that we really do take your comments, and if they're somewhat valid, we'll put them in there as a request. But that's the kind of conversation we have when we prioritize this, and we're like, okay, how many accidents are these people having that they need that? But it's a good point. So then this is under upcoming improvements. A lot of them are already done. This sort order will be changed so that the newest documents appear first, is on the very next work order, and it hasn't been sent to the software developer yet, but it will be in the next couple weeks according to Ivan, and then it takes them 6 weeks or whatever it takes them to do it. And that'll just save a little bit of time and know that your newest things are right on top. We started scanning signature page of agreements into OPTIS. That was a external user request, and it was a great one, and we did that. Our server is much faster now. That you'll notice when you log into production, it's a lot faster because we have our own dedicated server. overview link will be added to the navigation menu, so you don't have to go into the document. Like I said up here, to view overview, you have to go either into an agreement or a reimbursement request now. Eventually, it'll be on the navigation menu, and you can just go right there. So it's just another time saver. External users will be given read access to payment requests. I showed you that before they're condensed, you can't, it's not a live link, you can't open a payment request, but then after they're condensed and you open that up, then you can. So we're just going to make it so that you can always, at any time, look at them. Okay, so we've been having an internal conversation just this week, in fact, just today at lunch, about whether you can save, especially the asset entry screen in process. I was told it was done, but then when we tried to do it here, just practicing, Jenny and I, it didn't work. It didn't save it. And that, according to Ivan, is because we had already entered something into the fields and then took it out, or anyway, there's some interesting glitch where if it's all fresh and you're just starting and you've never messed with it at all and you're going through and you're down to 6 and you still have 50 more to go, you can save it. But if you've been in there working a lot and having to go back out and look at different mileages, say, and you go in and change even one of the fields, then it won't save. I don't know why. So this is sort of true and sort of not true. And we're still talking about it. Like I said, just today, can't we make it so that it just always saves? But we'll see.
So you're going to work on getting it where you thought it would be?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is another really good suggestion, to have a prepared by field and an authorized field and a submitted by field that is a little easier to understand, and it's not just something you look at in the workflow history, but that it would actually be a line on there and you'd be able to see who created this, who worked on it, who submitted it. And that's more the way it works for some of the internal things we do, where we forward on to other people, and so we'd like to make that the same way for you guys. And then also external user reports. That's another thing high on the list, to where you'll be able to run reports yourself out of the system. And it's keeping so much information for you. It'd be great to be able to just choose what you wanted to see and have a report. Any questions before I keep going on? Okay. So then there's a couple issues that still have not been resolved. One of them is, it happens almost always if you're using something other than Internet Explorer. You go to this authorized representative on the agency periodic report, and you choose the person from the drop-down menu, but for some reason it doesn't actually appear here. And then you can't submit it because it says, oh, this mandatory field is empty. And it's just totally a glitch in the system. It happens to maybe 1 out of 100 that use the system. And basically, there's nothing we can do about it. If it happens, you're supposed to just contact us and say, I'm having that issue. It's not, I selected it and it's not showing. Would you please push it through for me? And we will. Primary external user cannot forward a document to him or herself. My feeling is, and I'm kind of, again, advocating for this, is that if you're the primary user and you're, basically the one who is overseeing all this in the system, you should be able to go get and work on any document you want, no matter whose queue it's in, since you have the highest privilege in the system. As it is now, if Jay wanted to work on a document and it was stuck in someone else's queue, he'd have to go to that person and say, can you forward that to me so I can work on it? It'd be nice if you could just open it or forward it back to yourself, so it would keep track of that you went and kind of grabbed it from that person. But I don't know. I think that would be helpful. And it has been logged, so. The email functionality for password and e-response keywords resets is temporarily disabled, and that's still true. You can use the email to send an email to somebody that you forwarded a document to, but you can't ask for password or e-response keyword resets from within the system. This issue is no longer an issue, so I'm not even going to talk about it. It had to do with rounding, and when we got to the very last payment at the end of a biennium, there was like a penny out there just causing problems, but it's not anymore. So I guess there's nothing on that page. Woohoo! Okay, so any questions about that? There's a lot of it. I will, like I said, email this to you so you'll have it.
Is
Okay.
And
Okay.
the name, the actor.
I know there's a lot here, and that's, I'm going to keep saying that. That's why we're here. Jenny's here, Francine's here, I can answer questions, Ivan's there, Robin will answer questions. There's a lot to remember and a lot of little details, and if you miss one, sometimes you just are lost and you can't figure it out. So don't hesitate ever, ever, ever to call. Okay, so the only last thing I have is this final quiz, and I hope you're not too sleepy or your brains are full, or I'll open the door. It seems warm in here. It was cold earlier, now it seems a little warm.
Let's do it together.
That's fine with me if everybody, you look at it first and tell me if you want to work on it on your own
Oh, it doesn't matter.
or if you want to work on it together.